So I know that like the goal of what we're doing with these like quick workshops is going to be to get to the point where you all understand how to use Node-RED to listen to events, create a, today we're going to talk about creating a database in Airtable and hooking that event to the database to then record information into Airtable. And ultimately, these are like the basic building blocks to get to the place that we want to go, which is like token permissioning chat rooms and integrating Web3 like more deeply within Web2 interfaces. So
you can think of this Airtable integration as like a poor man's graph protocol. It essentially is caching all the event data like graph protocol would be, but in a no-code way, so that instead of having to have someone create the assembly script that maps to then be able to get the GraphQL queries in order to get that data, all this event data is just saved in Airtable. So you can just log into Airtable and then like take a look at your code, or not code, but all the data from the events from the contract.
Cool. And I would say, you know, I've used f.build, but I'm still a little bit dumb to a lot of this stuff. So hopefully how many people are on the call right now? Is it like 5 or is it like 20?
let's see, we have 10.
Okay. So everybody on this call, feel free to jump in and say, hey man, dumb it down, or can you stop right there? Because I think this is such a good visual to start to understand what's going on with smart contracts. And for me, even to make the leap of what, you know, because I got the exposure to this through Austin Griffiths, and I'm like, oh, now I finally understand what this is doing. Sometimes it's a function, sometimes this is an event, sometimes. So I don't want you to go too far backwards, but maybe don't run so far ahead that we feel, or this group feels, that they can't start to implement it or play with it. Because I haven't installed Node-RED yet, but I think I'm going to pretty darn soon, because it's really great way to start scaffolding, or at least look how things can interact with each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And happy to, you know, dumb it down or dig into anything if anything is unfamiliar or not understood. And I do think that Austin Griffith, you know, he's been focused on building his ETH build for educational purposes, and has done a really great job. We've been more focused on building products with Node-RED, and the reason we're using Node-RED, and the difference I think is that Node-RED has all of these integrations that are already available, and so it has a much more robust feature set as far as integrating within Web2. What Austin
has,
looks
way better. Yeah, this looks way better, because I couldn't really make build work for anything on my side. It was more instructional, like to sort of show you how things work. But this looks way better. That's why I'm really interested in digging into what you got going on here.
Totally. And
also, I'll say Airtable is awesome. If nothing, as an MVP, like a prototyping tool. You can use Zapier to hook Airtable to anything in the world.
Well, maybe Adam, you can. Well, what is Airtable? Because it's like I'm even like newly exposed to this. What is Airtable?
It's like I mean, I'm sure you guys have this is what it looks like. It's a friendly spreadsheet. I don't know how to, you know, like it's how can you get normal people to use database structures in their life? And they came up with a very usable answer, basically.
It's basically Excel on steroids, but in a way that's much more user-friendly.
Excel and like SQL had a little baby.
And is it fully integrated into this thing called Node-RED, or it's like a separate animal that Node-RED kind of taps on to get the columns in the fields?
It's Node-RED's database. Or it's just a database, you know, functionally in terms of how it talks to everything else in the software universe.
Integrated within Node-RED. It's like they are part of each other.
Oh, I don't know about that part.
So we actually had to create our own Airtable node. If Alok is on this call, which I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah,
oh,
so
here.
basically, these nodes, little nodes, there are some open source nodes, and we also do create time to time our own nodes. We have created these subflows that you see on the left side, and here these are the nodes which are available. And we can also do the npm install third-party nodes, which are already available in the market, like free open source. and we can directly utilize those nodes here.
Airtable like charges by cell or something like that, and you get like 5,000 free, and then eventually you have to sign up, kind of thing. So.
Right. Yeah. So there is an Airtable API to connect with any Node program or JavaScript program, and we have modified this Airtable node to just get into the Node-RED like nodes, and so we can drag and drop and pass the data, and it will behind the scene save the data to Airtable. So that's we are going to show in the call now. Yeah.
And as James mentioned earlier, this is like a poor man's graph protocol. So it allows for us to create a database that is essentially caching all of the events that are happening on chain. So instead of using or relying on the graph or making an extra step in your development process, you could just use Airtable, and it's a little bit more user friendly for like the non-technical people rather than going in and building in GraphQL.
Yeah, I'd say having been deep in GraphQL for the last like week or two again, it's very powerful, but because it's such like a highly typed, finicky language, it means it takes a lot of work.
And Bill, then that's a question I would want to ask. GraphQL has always kind of been on my radar to start, but I haven't started it at all. I just know that maybe one day I need to. Could this be a replacement where I wouldn't even need to go down GraphQL and I could just embrace Airtable and Node-RED and get the same sort of like in-game result that we're looking for?
I mean, like these chatbot apps through Abridged, absolutely. I'm excited to use something where I can just look up an Airtable, because that's so much easier than setting up a subgraph, especially for like a simple app.
Which is where I am. I need simple. Otherwise, my brain starts to cook.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for reference too, like I'm not a developer myself. I do like dive into the concepts, but the stack that we've been building in has definitely increased my dev capacity. I'm like a flow developer, so I can help specifically front end stuff like manage these flows within Node-RED and create the user experience.
Take us through one, like maybe just even one of those node lines, and maybe that'll help us kind of understand what we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a review of what we did like last week is that we created a message listener that was listening to an event that's happening on chain and then is sending a message into a Discord channel, right? And so the way that we're doing this is that we have this change node that is defining what we're listening to, what network we're listening to, what contract address we're listening to, the ABI code that we had set above here. Here's the ABI like database that it's pulling from.
Wow, this is really good.
And then the Etherscan link that is defining all of the data that we will be like listening to and pulling from in the flow. And then from there we have the contract listener subflow, which will use this data to make sense of what is happening and trigger this function every time something happens on chain. And so that flow is listening to the rules that were set in that change node.
And that's what's been hammering our Discord server, that I get my little pop-up in the bottom every couple of minutes.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Which is cool. I just ignore it now. I'm like, yeah, they're doing something
else just
there.
Mute it. But the point was to be able so that you can come in and you can actually change, like, you can change the word or the content, that this is the message actually that's being received. If you go to your Discord and you see all the messages, this is the label that is like coming with it. And then you also have the transaction hash data that is being pulled from the event listener. And then you also have the Etherscan link that's being created both from that transaction dash data or that transaction hash data, and this is pulling again from the change log, I believe, or
Yeah, at the very bottom, we have defined that flow. So it's available during all the flow settings. So we are getting the Etherscan link from the flow. That's what
okay.
it is.
So I have a question. So lines 1 through 9 in what was just up on the screen. Go back in there. That represents everything in that dashed line box behind it in the flow chart.
No.
Okay.
No.
The dashed line box is just grouping the event listener system for Discord. Both the event listener and messaging system. So you can ungroup flows if you'd like this, and these lines 1 through 9 is just within this create message function.
Which is
that
one node right there. Okay, that one orange one right there. Okay,
right.
gotcha. Okay,
and that's
gotcha.
that's responding to the contract event listener, which is a subflow, and we don't this is within it has its own code that is listening to the contract that is happening on chain, and this is what's being
Cool.
listening
Can you do
to
that
the
one more time so I understand that?
Mhm.
That's sort of like, where did that sub screen come from?
Yeah, sure. So
Okay.
within
Sorry,
these
guys.
subflows, no, totally, this is great. Within these subflows, there are nodes within them. So you can actually create your own subflow. So if I wanted to, I could actually come here and create a subflow. I would actually create it from that selection. So if I wanted to create a subflow that represents, that would represent essentially like Discord message message sender or event message subflow, something like that. And then I can go inside of there and I find, oh, okay, these are all of the nodes that are involved within this subflow. For other subflows like this contract event listener, we just have one node, but it is I guess to label it, we can create subflows, but subflows are essentially just flows that have been given or that have more complexity underneath them, right?
Got it. Yeah. Hey, Bill, can you just briefly speak from what you've understood about GraphQL to what you just saw right there, or this layout? Does it overlay really nicely with what you're doing, just more in a graphical sense?
So I guess where it would differ is, right here, the subflow listens to Etherscan and just picks up every time like a transaction happens on Etherscan, it looks like, and then creates a message based on that. Or I guess it listens directly to the block.
Yeah, it listens to the blockchain. So I would interpret this as in the graph protocol, what you're doing is you're creating code in assembly script.
Right.
And this assembly script code maps variable names and what would then represent as GraphQL objects to the data coming from the blockchain. So what you're doing in GraphQL is you're doing, or what you're doing in the graph protocol is you're doing two things. You're saying, okay, I want to take the blockchain event data, let's say A, and I'm going to map it to a variable name. So there's a mapping portion that you need to do. That's step one. And then once you do that,
and that comes from the ABI, right? I mean, we're basically pointing back to the ABI, so it knows what to query.
So the GraphQL, you load the ABI so that it knows what events are available to listen to on a particular contract address. But then you do that extra step that James was talking about, where you actually map And so you can create data objects that are created every time an event happens.
Got
And
it.
that's why it's powerful, but it's also more complicated. So like for our malloc subgraph, when a malloc's created, we can create a data object called a malloc, and then we can save new data to that malloc every time somebody joins or a proposal is created or sponsored or votes happen. And we can then also create like data objects for every vote and every person, or like every member, every proposal, and have lots of different information. And then on our front end, we can query that information from the GraphQL and organize the data from those objects in interesting ways. I think here we're listening directly to the blockchain, and the contract event listener is listening for, you know, the certain contracts. And then I guess what you
But
do
we can
in,
still fire asynchronous, writing to the blockchain through this protocol too, right? This isn't just
yeah,
a read.
well, GraphQL just listens.
Oh,
It's
okay.
like a reader, you know. You still like have your Web3 JS or ethers
Oh,
for
that's right. Yeah, of course.
writing to the blockchain.
But in
On an
here
app
in
like this.
Node-RED, we can actually write the script that's actually going to process transactions on the blockchain also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
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 yeah, you
and
can do that.
yeah, and instead of using the graph for setting up data objects, right? It seems like you can just create the like member object in the Airtable and say a member has like shares and votes and et cetera, and
Mm-hmm.
it listens via the contract listeners here and then
Mhm.
populates that Airtable, which is just like a lot simpler than learning GraphQL.
Got it. Cool. Okay.
Right,
So thanks for
right.
doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Take us through whatever you want to show us now. That's great.
yeah, so real quick, just to summarize, with GraphQL, you need to do the mapping, that's step one, and then you have to create the GraphQL queries to be able
Yeah.
to retrieve that info. So what we're doing, if you want to create an analogy with what we're, what between Node-RED and GraphQL, this create message node is doing that similar mapping. And then it's saving it to Airtable so that we're skipping that, or we're replacing the GraphQL step with just going to Airtable and looking at the data. So that's kind of how Airtable with Node-RED compares to GraphQL.
Yeah, yeah. GraphQL just requires a lot of setup. So it's really great for a complex app, but for something like simple,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like this would take so much less time.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I hope
right.
that helps answer the question.
Yeah. So
It totally did.
I have
Cool.
a question about like using the subflows that you all have already built and how we get those, because I'm still going through the process of setting up Node-RED. I had some AWS issues, which is always the story with AWS. But right, like obviously in the Node-RED environment that I create, I won't have like the Discord listener or the contract event listener, and I'm guessing that's like where you guys have done a ton of work to make it easy to listen to the blockchain events. Like how do we get started downloading those, or where can we find those?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The subflows, you need to import and export.
Okay.
Node-RED has a way of, and we've yet to do this, but we're trying to figure out a good way to be able to share this. So with Node-RED, you can create from the subflows an npm package, and then in Node-RED, there's JD, if you want to like scroll to that explorer, what you can do is you can just install, right? So you install, and if you make it available in npm, your subflow, you name it a certain way, and then you can install that it just via the command line. So this is what we're going to make it easy. There's this, it's kind of like VS Code where you can install libraries via npm. and packages, and they call them palettes here in Node-RED. And yeah, so this Ethereum transaction is one of our first ones. We'll show this in another workshop later, where essentially all you need to do is, if a contract is verified on Etherscan, you just cut and paste that Etherscan link, and you'll have all of, you don't have to import the ABI. Essentially, it will read the ABI from Etherscan, and then you can actually just like connect it. So we want to make this like really simple for people that you know, don't really, it's kind of like you're a super user and you're like technical, but you're not quite a coder. That's kind of this like sweet spot that we're trying to hit when it comes to Node-RED.
Yeah. So the easiest way to get set up would be to do the Abridged DAO help and go through that process.
So the DAO help is a relatively, I mean, this is like, this has like most of all the bells and whistles that we've built thus far. It does, and you know, there's a number of teams who have already been building with it and forked it, and are working to you know, continue developing it. But if you want like something that's already pieced together and that you can start like playing with and breaking and understanding at your own pace, like how to change things, you can set up your own. This is essentially a version of Collab 19. And so this is the code behind Collab 19. So it's an Aragon DAO built into Telegram. And it has all of the Abridged SDK. I don't think this has the MetaMask flow within it, but it'll have the Abridged SDK, all of our sort of backend management, as well as the different like API keys and the way that we're handling keys within both Airtable and using AWS KMS to encrypt those keys. And yeah, it's a bit of a beast of a flow, but it's definitely something if you are interested in like digging deeper and you have some technical experience, obviously. So it would be maybe a place that might be a good place to start and like explore at your own pace.
Cool. Yeah. I was just trying to figure out, like, after I finally got Node-RED and AWS set up, like where to really start playing around with this. And yeah, it makes sense to start with this repo and the
Yeah,
collab
I mean,
bot,
James,
or
you can even take us through that if you want, because I mean, the people that are actively going to use it are the ones that are going to probably benefit most from these, you know, Wednesday calls. Like, give us something that we can do, even if you have to say, just do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
Is
what
there a
we're
repo for
trying
the-
to, yeah.
Sorry,
Bill-
is there
Bill-
a repo for the little, for the smaller flow, the like flex bot that we're going through that we could download? Since that seems like an easy.
Oh, yeah, no, I gave you all the access to this repo specifically. So we already spun it up, and I've dropped the link into the Lex DAO chat. So
this is ours. So
this
we
is
can actually
yours.
start
Yeah,
doing this one, Bill.
yeah. No need to even
I'm
spin
like,
up your
oh,
own
this
local.
is so great. I wish we had access to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. You have it. So it's in the gated chat. The Lex DAO dev instance. So I'm just gonna add everyone real quick.
So Bill, I guess you didn't have to go through all that AWS thing. It was just right here for you, already hosted.
Yeah, I still need to do the Node-RED setup. Somehow I got like, my personal email doesn't work on Amazon.
Now, why is it required to be on AWS? Like, of course not, right? We can run
No, definitely not. You can do it locally, or you know, use any database. Serverless, really. There's Node-RED has a bunch of really great resources that you can use to find all the options to set up their own servers and things and run an instance. But yeah, so what we're trying to do here, because the DAO help is great if you want to just really dive in and break things, but it's not all that great as far as like incrementally understanding what is going on. So what we wanted to do with you all is really focus on the base things and teach in like small steps, like here's the basic things that you need to know to then get to a finished product like DAO Health. And the first step is, this event listener, we thought, and then integrating Airtable as a database to help manage the data and also listen for data. It serves as both like, GraphQL and a mempool essentially. And then next, we wanted to show how to integrate MetaMask and create a MetaMask link and like associate that on Airtable so that you can manage users and that this system then can integrate and speak to itself. And then after MetaMask, then it would be the abridged contracts so that you can then make contract calls on chain through mobile. And then it's also integrating or talking about how to use this Ether.
I love this. Bill, let me ask you a question really quick.
Yeah.
Since we're sort of chasing the Pokemole integration for the next version of the Moloch, does it make sense, since we're kind of like struggling with that just a tad? I mean, Evalier said he's working on it. We're going to make some progress. Would it make more sense for us to kind of model Pokemole and kind of do it from scratch, starting here with what we're looking up on the screen? Or is that making things too confusing or too political or whatever?
No, I mean, I think like the end goal would be to have the Pokemole is great as just kind of like the website where if people want to go on the website and vote for stuff or look at the members, etc. That's helpful to have, but I think like this flow of teaching us how to build with Abridged is going to let us create chatbots for the Pokemole, where I think like that's better for interaction and engagement. So I imagine a world where DAOs still have like some sort of website and interface on the web, but that people will end up interacting with their DAOs through chatbots and chat groups.
And that also gets us to the permission chats too, right? That ultimately I want to see. Okay, awesome.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and I think like the idea of going through this step by step also makes a ton of sense, rather than just starting with the collab bot and trying to break things, because this is helpful in seeing how everything's like built from the ground up, which I personally find like very valuable.
Awesome. That is great. And so I guess if we want, and I'm happy to keep answering questions and moseying around, but I think we've kind of reviewed at a high level the pieces here. And so we have the event listener that we reviewed last week, and I did upload that video into the LexDAO raid chat, the gated chat. And then this is an example of how you can add records to Airtable and also get records from Airtable. So add records to would be like you'd use this for user onboarding. You can also use this for event listening and event aggregation, like we're doing right now, which is what we have set up here. And then the get records would be used mainly for like checking if someone is a member, defining permissions, doing other, like pulling from the blockchain, even checking maybe or pulling data on a specific proposal, for instance, if you're in a DAO.
Yeah, so the way that we want to build this up is like first event listener, read from the blockchain, and then the second tab, the database, you want to go back to a JD. Maybe you want to show how to like configure Airtable, because here underneath the Airtable, you'll see missing credentials. And there are things that you need to connect so that Node-RED knows about Airtable and walk through that. And then that third tab is saving blockchain data, is taking the lessons from event listener and then the lessons of like being able to connect Node-RED to Airtable to ultimately save your blockchain events to Airtable itself. And so we can walk you through that. And so every week we'll have new tabs that build off from previous lessons. And then I think this is kind of what you're saying, Bill, is like, this is how we kind of like build up from the ground up to then like ultimately a token permission chat room, and then like Pokemon bot version, and then token permission chat room, all of that stuff. So we'll unveil and we'll work up step by step, but ultimately, hopefully sooner than later, you'll be able to have full knowledge of how this all works. And the great thing about this is that, okay, you can have, let's say, this chatbot, and if it's saving to Airtable, you can also then say, hey, why not connect Airtable to Zapier if I want some other type of flow? And so you can kind of mix and match your tooling in a no-code way. And this is hopefully the kind of like innovation or things that we want to create. And, sooner than later, would love to get LexDAO, get all of the legal wrappers, and you guys creating your own flows and putting them in Airtable, putting them in Node-RED, hooking up to Zapier, so that we can like get this money Legos,
we will.
Going.
I see that this is probably the linchpin of getting there, because it makes it probably easier for certain people that are really never going to be able to get their arms around straight up Solidity and Remix and things like that.
Yeah, that's the kind of the sweet spot that we're hoping to fill, that gap.
Real quick, that little plus sign in the upper right-hand corner below the red deploy key, is that to like add another tab? And that, okay, so that's called a flow. So that's how you create another flow in there. Gotcha.
So JD, you want to quickly get into just saving the blockchain data, or like first configuring the database in Airtable, that second tab, and then the third tab, eventually just like getting that blockchain data event listening that's happening on Covent for DAI, and then just saving it into an entry in Airtable.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so this is the first tab that James was describing. In Airtable, the way to configure, and I already configured one, but I can just walk through what you would do if you wanted to create your own Airtable. You would create a new base or fork an existing base, whichever you would like to do. Name that base. I'm going to say LexDAO test. And then within the base, you get the API keys in two places. One from that question mark, and you find the base ID here. And then from your own account, you will take your personal API key. And within this table, you also need to name it something specific to input into Node-RED so it knows what it's listening to. So once you have those two keys, you would add them here, and also add a name for it. And then here is where you would add the name of your table. So I said LexDAO underscore test. I believe it might be case sensitive. So
yeah, it's case sensitive. It has to be exact.
Great. And then the input and output are here. So it's the payload record, message payload records that are coming from that. From there, and then the other piece here is that the message payload record is defined here as the either event, or this is where you're creating that what will be put into the Airtable. And so we already created one Airtable, so I'll go back and configured the this function node here. And this is where we're, that's that function node, and this is the Airtable again. And we've hooked it up to the event listener that has been configured for the DAI contract. And so, I think like maybe even a first step, if you all want to play around with this more, is instead of listening to the DAI contract, you can maybe listen to like Moloch contract or something. And the way that you like we can talk about how you would set that up, but that would be back in the event listener. You just need to add an ABI like I have here, and then adjust the rules here to then like listen to the right contract, listen to the right network, and listen to the right ABI.
Hey, can you jump into the tab database Airtable?
Uh-huh.
Okay, because I opened up the instance on my local computer and threw like an Airtable in there. I just wanted to see if it was automatically updating on your screen also.
Right. So so that's one thing to note with Node-RED. Whenever you have multiple people working on a same instance, it will only update if you deploy. So if you deploy your instance, it will notify me and be like, hey, there's been some and there's been some changes made. And so I can review these changes. And then if the changes don't conflict with anything, okay, that's great. They can just be merged. I might as well merge them. And then
it was go back into the Airtable right there. I just threw another
there.
Airtable down there.
Sweet.
Okay, so just delete
So that's
that one.
right. So that's how you will co-develop with other people though.
Nice.
Yeah, and so it will be important to create a system for that if like development really begins within the LexDAO and like you have 5 people building into the same flow interface on different parts. It'll be important that you aren't like erasing each other's work. So a way that we have been managing that.
Really quick on that, just so I can get mine back to where you're at. The deploy is now grayed out. I want mine to look back like yours, and you just deleted my node right there. So what do I do? Is there like a
well, the reason that the deploy is grayed out is because you have already deployed, and there's nothing to deploy. So if I refresh my screen, my deploy will be grayed out. See?
Yeah, and then.
Okay, I just want to get it back. So you and I are basically looking at the same thing. So now we have that stubborn node down there. Okay.
Totally. Yeah, we're looking at the same thing. So
okay.
I mean, if I do this and I deploy, now you can merge. You know.
Oh, okay. Now it showed up on my screen saying it has been updated. Review changes. Merge it. Okay, I see. I got that flow. Okay, love this, man.
Yeah, it's super fun, right? It's like, oh wow, okay, cool. Just
it's collaborative,
really easily.
Solidity contracting on the fly with group members. What?
And so so I guess like back to this like blockchain event data, this is combining both of these previous nodes and or these previous flows. And like I said, like you could edit it to maybe listen to a Moloch contract, for instance. But right now, this is the flow, this is the event listener, and this is defining what it is listening to. And then this data here is formatting what is relevant. And so what is going to come from the listener and be input into Airtable. And the data that's relevant here must align with columns in the Airtable. And so we have entry and transaction hash, and they're both defined within this function node. So the entry is a data.event that is defined by the listener. Or, yeah, where's this?
That's coming from the blockchain event listener.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, we're just taking that blockchain event listener data and converting it to match into the Airtable format, and then sending it back to the Airtable to save it.
Where did you get the I didn't see where you got the Airtable actual columns, that looks like the spreadsheet. Where did you click to get that? So that's like a separate link up at the top called airtable.com. Okay.
This is your actual
different
Airtable.
than the Node-RED tab. Okay, so go back to is there like a hyperlink within here to get to that that other hyperlink?
There's not.
Okay, so you just have to kind of reload them both up in your browser.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
You actually have to set up your own Airtable. And like I said, like previously, you have to find those API keys to then input into Node-RED here.
Bill, do you understand that step? So we don't have to waste too much time on it, that if I need some help. Okay. Yeah. It looks like he's got 4 open tabs at the top that we kind of need to like get all 4 of those open to work with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so yeah, are there any other questions, I guess? And so and Alok, like you said, this data event, is that found? And so one thing that's really nice within Node-RED as well is that you can command search anything. So, okay, so it's just found in this formatting data,
Yeah,
but
so
it's being pulled
open.
from the blockchain data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
open that formatting data and that formatting data function node. So that's a local variable. We are getting that message dot events, and that message dot event is basically coming from the contract event listener. And there are multiple arguments, and we are just picking up the first argument and sending that data back to the Node-RED. Sorry, Airtable.
Oh, cool. So if we wanted to capture like 2 or 3 arguments, we would just
Yeah,
set
yeah.
that.
So we can like capture other arguments and add more entries like number 4 and number 5. Similarly, we can keep adding number 6, number 7, and then we also need to add those fields into the Airtable column.
Yep. Oh, cool.
Sweet. So yeah, this is kind of what we wanted to run over today. We wanted to keep it pretty limited, but there's plenty to kind of chew on and dig into here.
Okay,
so
well then
unless,
yeah, I've got one more question. So if we wanted to go through that process of getting those tabs open up at the top, would you say start out at like airtable.com or something, and then just like create the database first, and then?
Yeah. So I've given you the Node-RED instance.
Got that.
Yeah, you can just go create an account on airtable.com.
Okay, so
and
airtable.com. Okay.
yeah, and then you spin up your own Airtable, and then like I said, you just match the columns with and format your data accordingly, and you just have to make sure that all of the pieces there are in synchronized, and then add the API keys to your Airtable to make sure that the Airtable node is actually listening to the right thing so that it can upload data.
Is there an easy way to fork this Node-RED instance so that, right, if I'm playing with it, I don't have to merge?
Yeah, there is. So you can export the code and just copy to clipboard, and then go to another Node-RED instance and import. But yeah, I would actually export and then copy. Oh, current. Okay, so selected nodes are all flows is what you'd want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sweet. But yeah, so this is what we wanted to run over today. Next week, I believe we will focus on integrating MetaMask, and then we can start talking about user account management within Airtable. So linking maybe a Telegram or Discord handle with a certain account. That's where that's happening within Airtable today.
Oh, nice.
This is so great. Cool. Thanks for taking the time and doing this with us. Is there anything we can help you with? Is there anything you need?
I honestly, we're enjoying this process, and I think, like I mentioned before, we're excited that you all are excited and want to. We're excited to build together. We will have this, I think there's 3 levels of our product that we will be coming out with. And the focus is going to be for us to really come out with the first 2 levels, which is going to be more the user interface for the non-technical people. So that looks like a default bot system, similar to what I kind of showed in a YouTube video of a tutorial in Telegram, where you can add this Collabland bot, create your token permission chat room, and integrate, different token permissions or airdrop tokens. There's a few default features, but if you want to create your own custom bot for your community, then it becomes a little bit more involved. You have to set up your own sort of Airtable. You have to create your own bot APIs. It's like a next level. So you have to be a little bit more technical, and it also it may cost a little bit more within our Collabland platform. And then what we're showing you here is helping inform us of how to create lessons on Node-RED and on the technical stack that we've been building, because the roadmap for us is going to be to eventually fully decentralized and hold a DICO to support the development of this product. And a piece of that will be that contributors to the platform get rewarded in tokens. And so as we keep building, we want other people to learn how to build within our system so that they can contribute and then add value to the network and also receive value from the network.
That's great, because we've got a ton of them for you that obviously we're just going to build them out ourselves, but we'll do it with your help, because I know Ross, once I scrape through everything that OpenLaw or everything Ross had hosted on OpenLaw, there's like almost 100 of them that we could just have 100 lessons, and each one of them is different. They all have a legal slant to them. Unfortunately, it's not that, outside of law, but there's a ton of us to build out. And then we achieve our goals of actually having deliverables to the legal community in a way that I think we can deliver, that people aren't going to get freaked out, that are like lawyers. They get freaked
we
out
can
really
have
easily.
like a create your own LLC chatbot that writes everything to the blockchain and spins up a Moloch for you.
Yeah,
That'd be
stuff
the
like
cool
that.
end state.
That we could compress it down enough where it's digestible and it doesn't become overwhelming for them. And that's what I really love that I'm seeing right here. It allows us as LexDAO to test these little mini sort of integrations, and you're just looking over our shoulder going, hey, I don't even have to deal with those LexDAO guys. They're kind of doing it, but we have the rights or the license or whatever to take everything we do and spin it the way you want. And then we obviously get it delivered on our side. And somewhere in there, we figure out what's working for both of us.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is Brendan. I'll just chime in. I've been listening in the background. This is all very compelling. It's a really important thing to be looking towards automated and autonomous legal entities of these sorts, just to be able to spin things up at the drop of a dime. So it's all really exciting. Glad to see, glad to hear.
Thanks, Brendan.
Nice. Hey,
Good to have you
Brendan,
here.
what's up?
Hey, all. Sorry, I'm in my car. I pulled off on the side of the road here.
No worries.
Okay, should we let these guys go and then we roll back into Discord?
Yep. Yeah. Thanks again.